What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, July 11th, 2017, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phones when you call on in. And for those of you who are watching on BAM User TV, we had another little snafu with our Skype connection, and it seems like ever since Skype basically turned off the older peer-to-peer system, and basically the older Skypes stopped working as of the first of this month. They do seem to be having a lot of troubles, and not just with RBN, because we use Skype to talk to family on the mainland, and it's been acting up and just all kinds of issues. And the idea of progress over time is that things get better, not worse. And somewhere along the line, we seem to have lost that. Okay, we got lots to talk about here today, and we're going to start with the issue of Comey giving his memos of conversations with Trump to his friend, who then in turn gave them to the New York Times. The friend is now out there denying that the memos he was given were marked that they were classified information. So basically, he's already trying to cut and run. He's trying to distance himself, basically throwing Comey under the bus, because it is yet another Title 18 felony violation to take classified information and strip the classified headers off. Remember that email that surfaced from Hillary Clinton telling one of her subordinates to do just that? That's a Title 18 violation. So Comey didn't just violate the Federal Records Act, he's mishandled classified information. Now, apparently over on Twitter, and we're still evaluating this story, there's a new anonymous Twitter user just dumped over 28,000 emails from Hillary Clinton onto social media. It's out there as torrent feeds. People are downloading them, looking through them, and already Hillary's defenders are saying, "Oh, you've already seen all these. This is old stuff. It's just, Gary Webb out there trying to make a name for himself and all the rest of it." But considering how rapidly that response came on out, they can't really know. They can't go through 28,000 emails in just a matter of a few hours. So a lot of people are looking into those emails, and we'll see if anything of interest surfaces. And as always, we're going to look for confirmation about anything that is in there. Now, today, the big stink that is being manufactured by that fertilizer factory on the Potomac River was that Donald Trump Jr. was advised ahead of time via email that this meeting he was going to have with this Russian attorney was part of a Russian government effort to help the campaign. This was from a report in the New York Slimes, and the New York Slimes says, we haven't actually seen the email, but we have been told by 3 people that that email is out there. And again, they're trying to just make a big case here, and they've got smoke to work with. And let us be honest, it's not like the Russians are the only ones with damaging information on the Clintons. The District of Clinton is up to its collective neck in damaging evidence such as the repeated pay-for-play and the leaked DNC emails, the Uranium One deal, the Clinton Foundation slush fund allegations, admitted mishandling of classified information, possible espionage, so forth and so on. So Donald Trump Jr. just released the entire email chain leading up to this meeting, and no, there's nothing in there about he was warned that this was part of a Russian government effort to influence the election. Now, what really happened is a lot more down to earth. There was this attorney who wanted a meeting with Donald Trump Jr. and used as bait the offering of opposition research on Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump said, okay, we'll see what you've got to say. And when he got to the meeting, it turned out the lawyer really didn't have much of anything at all, the stuff that you see all over the net. And apparently she had baited him in to basically get him to talk about removing the Magnitsky Act, which blacklists suspected Russian human rights abusers, and talk about abortion law. She basically suckered him in. And that was the true agenda all along. And there was no actual damaging information about Hillary involved in that meeting. It's another nothing burger, but it gets a little bit more interesting. The lawyer's name is Natalia Veselnitskaya. Say that one 3 times fast. And basically it was a meeting regarding her fight for Russian adoption rights and the repeal of the Magnitsky Act. Now, she was actually denied a visa to the United States, but she got a special, what's called a parole letter, allowing her to enter the country in order to represent this case. Now, Veselnitskaya represents a Russian company called Previzon Holdings, owned by Russian businessman Denis Katsev, in a case brought against it by U.S. prosecutors. In turn, Previzon Holdings works with Fusion GPS, which is the company that hired former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele to come up with that phony, debunked Russian collusion dossier on Trump. In other words, this was a setup. They wanted to get a meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and this Russian lawyer for no other reason that they could say, oh, he was meeting with a Russian lawyer. It had to be for nefarious purposes. We're going to do a quick little shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. And of course, they're going on back and forth about, oh, Russian collusion. They're still on this. They're not letting go of it. It's like they're drowning, and the Russian collusion story is the last life preserver they've got. So they're just clinging to it. And meanwhile, of course, the corporate media is ignoring much more worse things that are going on out there. And they're still trying to push the idea that the Trump campaign was involved in Russia's hacking of the DNC email servers, even though we now know from a study of the actual data, the data was copied off directly, server to flash disk. It did not have the delays in it that you would see going over the internet to Russia or anyone else. Now, Politico, back in January, revealed that a lot of the anti-Trump people were getting involved with Ukraine and trying to use Ukraine to find dirt on Donald Trump. Veteran DNC operative who previously worked in the Clinton White House, Alexandra Chalupa, worked with Ukrainian government officials and journalists from both the Ukraine and America to dig up Russia-related opposition research on Trump and Manafort. They were out there trying to find something, and they didn't, or they wouldn't be trying to fabricate it now. And she shared her anti-Trump research with both the DNC and the Clinton campaign, according to Politico. So, again, pot trying to call the kettle black. They're projecting. They're projecting their own nefarious activities onto Trump. We're not the ones colluding with foreign governments to interfere with the election. It's all Donald Trump and his people. We're not rigging the elections. Russia did, for so forth and so on. So I want to do a little flashback story. This came out a few months ago. There was this Russian citizen who was accused of being a hacker by both Russia and the United States. And apparently, the FBI offered to cut him a deal that if he would confess to interfering in the 2016 presidential election on behalf of Russia, that all of his legal problems would go away. He'd be brought to the United States. He'd be given a good home and a bunch of cash with which to enjoy his new life. And apparently, the hacker decided that he wasn't going to do that, possibly because so many people who've done deals with the FBI have actually wound up dead. But you need to remember, this stuff was happening. This came out through his lawyer. Now, former CIA analyst Fred Fleets said yesterday on Fox News, a hand-picked group of 12 analysts wrote that one U.S. intelligence report which blamed Russia for hacking the election and believes that this group was rigged and fabricated by all pro-Obama intelligence officials. In other words, all the people who hated Trump, wanted Trump out, they were put together in their scoop and say, give us an intelligence report that Russia rigged the election. And that's what they wrote up. That's what they wrote on up. All right, we're going to go to the telephones now. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, I had to drive for a long distance today, so I decided to turn on to radio. To AM radio, listen to Glenn Beck, who I normally don't listen to anymore. But just to see what this enemy is saying, and I wasn't disappointed because I figured he would be saying something about this nonsense about Trump and this new so-called revelation. And I wasn't disappointed. This enemy of the people, this enemy of this country, 3 hours he spent on, almost, you could almost see how smug, I didn't, obviously I wasn't watching him on TV, but he just listened to his voice, how smug he sounded, like how he enjoyed this, thinking this could definitely lead to Trump's impeachment and the imprisonment of Donald Jr. I'm telling you, Mike, I've told you that before, and I told other people this too. Glenn Beck is no friend of the liberty movement. He's no friend of the independent movement. He's not an alternate media by any means. This man is a slimeball. He is a traitor. He's a backstabber. I've known this for years. I used to listen to him pretty regularly years ago. And then when he stabbed, I don't know if you remember Deborah Medina.
Yes.
She ran for governor of Texas as an independent, and he ambushed her on his show when he asked her about 9/11, and she didn't actually say she believed 9/11 was a conspiracy, but she had her doubts, and he ambushed her, something awful. And the fact of the matter is, what showed me what a hypocrite this man was and a liar is at the same time. The one book I read was Overton Window by him. This was what he called a fiction, but he said it's also a faction. You know what faction is? It means there's a lot of fact. All that book was about was false flags, including the plot was for the deep state. You call them the deep state, but you knew Wall Street and the government to blow up Las Vegas, Nevada with a nuclear weapon. That was the whole. That was what the plot was. And an Alex Jones character, together with a rogue FBI agent. I don't mean, when I say rogue, I mean, decent FBI agent, wanted to stop it. There's no question the character was Alex Jones, okay? And yet, even at that time, he was constantly bad-mouthing Alex Jones. So then I started doing a little bit more research about Beck, and I started realizing this guy is an ultimate slimeball. I personally believe, you don't have to go along with it because I know you don't look for legal purposes, but I personally believe he is connected with the CIA. I think it's Operation Mockingbird, classical with him. Certain things he says and does. This guy is no good, and I wish people would get it through their heads and stop listening to this guy. Breitbart themselves, they're just becoming milk toast, basically. They refuse to cover certain stories, including the one you mentioned about the Ukrainian meddling in our election.
Yes.
That Stranahan has pointed out on YouTube. Before I left this morning, I watched Stranahan on YouTube there talking about, this thing with Chalupa and all this other stuff. There's no question that he's with the Ukrainian. He's really going into this pretty deeply, And but the thing is about Beck is I smell a rat for a while. Every once in a while, when something big is happening, I get a chance, I'll listen to him for a while just to see, what this enemy is up to. And boy, I'll tell you, he is bad news. I suggest people try to call him when they can. He very seldom takes phone calls, from what I gather. And hit him on his Facebook and on his website and his own site, Glenn Beck Facebook. He already blocked me from comments on his actual Facebook site, but I could get him.
I'm blocked all across Facebook right now. Facebook has disabled my ability to comment or post on my own threads, and I never got any kind of a notification as to why. But I can take a real guess here. Not that I use Facebook that much anymore. I've moved on to these other social media platforms. But yeah, we're starting to see the censorship just become very visible in the hope that we'll accept it, and of course we don't because of that First Amendment.
I see a lock on Twitter for me. Does that mean that nobody's listening to my tweets, or they can't hear my tweets, or is it only if somebody's a follower they can still listen to it, or what? How does that work?
Yeah, somebody has to be a follower to see your tweets.
Or if I follow them?
It's very unusual. Well, I have to say I actually don't know because I don't actually spend that much time on Twitter. I mean, I certainly did last year during the height of the campaign, But I don't know how that works. I know that if you're following somebody, you see their tweets. I don't know that they see your tweets unless you do a specific reply to them.
Wow. I'm wondering. Well, it's has this thing to reply to them, but are they even listening to reply if I have a lock on mine? I see that thing of a lock.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, I don't have that. Facebook is, I have a lot of different friends. You'd be surprised how many Russian and Syrian friends I have on Facebook right now.
Mm-hmm.
A ton of them. But as far as Twitter, they really, this country is turning into a police state, plain and simple.
Oh, yeah.
And what Alex Jones, I don't know if you just heard what Jones was saying about him and Drudge are both being investigated as being kind of Russian agents.
Yeah, we were going to get into that, yes.
I mean, this is terrible. I mean, we better wake up. This country needs to wake up. We got to take this country back, or there will be a civil war of some kind. And I'm not talking just a political civil war. They're going to force this country into a civil war or World War III, one or the other, depending on which one comes first. Because let's face it, all this stuff with Russia, all this says is makes it more difficult for Trump. It was not as gutsy as I would have liked him to be. It makes it more difficult for him to deal with Russia the way he wants to. He has to be standoffish, and you don't want that to happen because then the tensions increase, and the possibility that the nukes start flying becomes greater and greater.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Happening. Yet this is what this is accomplishing. We got to take this country back. We got to make it clear who the enemy really is, and Trump has to make it clear who the enemy is. He's got to take the offensive. Don't be a punk. You came off with the guy as a fighter. Show you're a fighter. You know what he reminds me of right now? I don't know if you ever heard of this. I forgot the name of the general, but it was the landing at Anzio by American and British troops in World War II.
Yes.
And when they first, invaded the Italian mainland. And the general there, it was an American general, instead of going on the attack right away, going after the Germans, cleaning them out, he went into defensive, set up defensive positions, and gave the Germans a chance to counterattack. And Churchill, he says, I thought we put a tiger on the beach there at Anzio. Instead, we got a blubbering whale. And that reminds me kind of like Trump. We thought we put a tiger on the beach. Instead, we got a blubbering whale. He's just, fumbling around. That doesn't know what he's doing. Puts a bum like McMaster in there. Has a son-in-law who, at the best I can say for Kushner, he doesn't know what he's doing. At the worst, he's some kind of an agent, not for Russia, but maybe for Israel and Saudi Arabia. Okay, that's about and others, and I just don't understand it. He got a complete airhead like Nikki Haley. Doesn't have no clue what she's doing or talking about.
Yes.
By the way, I just want to say something about Nikki Haley. I just correction. I remember, I think about a month ago, somebody commented that she's a Native American Indian. She's not. She's an East Indian Indian. Her parents from India.
Okay.
So
okay.
I just don't want to, I just wanted to straighten it out. And I don't think a real Native American Indian would act like her.
Well, I mean, she's certainly not behaving like a diplomat, and her performances up at the UN Security Council are an embarrassment to our nation. It is lowering global respect for the United States. But at this point, I think the rest of the world has come to understand that the U.S. government and economic system have gotten themselves into another corner. And as they have done in the past, they're going to try and get into a world war to get out of it, or at least to have something to blame for the coming economic crash, which all the top experts are saying is likely to happen before the end of the year. And somebody may have just convinced Donald Trump, the economy is going to collapse. There's no way to stop it. And if you don't have a war, if you can't blame Russia or China for the economic crash, then the American people are going to blame you. Because it's starting to look more and more like Trump is on board with the war agenda. Anyway, Mark, I'm going to have to let you go.
Just one more thing.
All right, I'm going to hold you over the commercial break. I'm going to hold you over the commercial break. Stay on the line. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking with Mark in North Carolina. You had one more question to share with us, correct?
Yeah. I just want to say that I noticed that the minute it seems like Trump is getting more on board with Putin and about Syria and all that, and the Ukraine maybe, right away something else comes out, and this is not a coincidence. They're doing this for a reason.
I think he's being manipulated by his own advisors. That's the problem.
We the people got to be ready. If it does come to a nuclear war, we got to make sure these clowns do not reach their bunkers. That's all I can say.
Well, I think we're going to be concerned about us reaching our bunkers, of which we have none here on the island. I mean, the military do. They hollowed out the middle of the mountains there where the H3 goes. It's. I think Trump is being manipulated by his own advisors. The advisors did the same thing to McNamara and Kennedy during Vietnam. I think he's being given bad information. McMaster said, yeah, this was something that they may do. Harry Reid was saying, yeah, we can control Donald Trump. All we have to do is creatively edit those little reports that we put on his desk every day.
Yeah, well, that's about it. I mean, like I said, God help us if we don't get it together,
Well, again, I'm not encouraging violence or civil war or revolution, because if there's one thing the U.S. government does know how to do very well, it's kill people. They've killed an estimated between 20 and 30 million since the end of World War II. But if you take a real look at how fragile our economic system has become, if you look at the high degree of factionalism and infighting within the political class, you'll realize how close to a collapse the U.S. government is, along the lines of what happened in the former Soviet Union. And I think that would be a very, very good thing to have happen, and maybe we ought to be thinking about ways we can encourage an economic collapse as opposed to try and take up arms in the streets and get a lot of bystanders killed in the process.
And I also don't think the military, the actual military, I'm not talking about these generals and stuff, the mid-level officers and the enlisted men, I think when push comes to shove, they would side with the American people. I'm not concerned about the police. We could take care of the police. They would be fairly easy. And a lot of them would probably join the Patriots anyway, especially sheriff's departments in the Midwest, the South,
yes,
the West, places like that. So I'm not too worried about them, and I believe the military would be, a lot of the military at least, would be on the side of Patriots if it really came down to it. I mean, I hope the guy doesn't come down to it, but, the more and more it looks to me like we're being pushed into a corner. And I think if they impeach Trump, this would be against the will of the American people, and I think that might start it off right there and then.
It could. It very well could. It very well could, because they're being so obvious about the double standards in terms of what Congress is investigating and what they refuse to look at, coupled with the corporate media's obvious bias here. It's very obvious we're not dealing with a just, objective, and fair or even legal system. This is simply a political infighting made public. And when the political infighting starts to be visible to the general public, that's usually a warning sign that the end of that government is at hand. We saw exactly the same thing in the former Soviet Union. As they got closer and closer to the end, the faction fights started breaking out into public view. And everybody was reporting on that and feeding it into their fax machines.
By the way, did you know, I found this out from Oliver Stone at his interview with Putin. I didn't know this before. That Putin actually resigned from the KGB. Everybody keeps saying, "Oh, the KGB, man, KGB." When they overthrew, for a time they overthrew Gorbachev and actually arrested him, the hardcore communist.
Yes.
And he actually resigned from the KGB at that point because he knew he felt it was wrong. So again, it shows you that this man has probably more honor and credibility than any leader that this country has right now.
Well, he's definitely continues to show himself to be a statesman here. And Mark, I'm really going to have to let you go this time because we are coming up on commercial break. We got a lot of news to report and other phone calls to take. So we're going to take a 4-minute break here. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, yesterday, we made a reference to how NBC had actually aired a news story back in April about how the State Department appeared to be covering up some kind of pedophile crime. And apparently, one of the production staff has now gone public saying that after that story aired, people from Hillary's campaign literally threatened the lives of NBC investigative reporters to shut down the investigation. And I'm sure they went along with it when you look at the long trail of dead bodies behind the Clintons. But, I mean, that's very heavy-handed. And, of course, methinks they doth protest too much. Now, we know there's a pedophile problem in high places. I don't know why there's a goes withness there, but there does seem to be. We need to be careful that we're not set up for something we can be sued for, like blaming somebody who's innocent. But if you look at some of the photos of the interior of John Podesta's home, at some of the artwork that's there, there's a little something weird going on there with his taste in art. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Mike in Alaska, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Regarding Russia and Ukraine, I disagree with the last caller. I think that what's happening is Israel is sort of trying to play the U.S. and Russia off on one another.
Oh, yes.
And they've always had these hard feelings towards Russia because of their real turbulent past with them, and also now they don't control them. It's not the Soviet Union, and Putin is trying to revitalize Christianity, also get the birth rates up. But overall, Russia has the economy the size of Italy, so they have the nuclear weapons. They are a strong force, but they would rather work together. And I talked to a Russian guy out in Bali, Indonesia, and he had his wife have both of his kids in New York.
Yes.
And he said, I'm doing this because I want my kids to have a future. I want them to be able to go to America. And he had read up. They're smart. They're real crafty. He read up about the birthright stuff. And we can disagree on whether that's really the law, but he knew that if he did that, the way things stand, that those kids would have opportunities in the future.
Well, Mike, let me cut in here right now because your Russian friend in Bali may be imagining the United States as it is presented to the rest of the world over the corporate media. But the reality is looking at the economics of our country, the scam that college education has been turned into, just another mechanism for plunging people on the debt hook. Most Americans inside the country do not see a positive future ahead of them. And that's weighing them down. And I understand a lot of people are being lured here to the United States they see in movies and TV shows and on CNN International, but that place just doesn't exist anymore. Now, as far as Italy's economy right now, they've had to do another massive bail-in to save their banks. And you're not seeing that up in Russia. So I think Russia's economy is a lot stronger and more robust than you think it is.
Well, I agree that that's why they think that, because when I lived in Ukraine, I had a Ukrainian guy say he wanted to get his kid into Canada. And I told them, both of these guys, I said, hey, here's the status, here's the culture, here's what's going on. Once you do that child will be on the hook for the taxes worldwide. You can't just have a U.S. passport and then live in Russia and if you become a millionaire, like with that Boris Johnson guy in England, they show up and say, hey, you sold an apartment. Where's our cut of it? So I reminded them that it's not all bed of roses. But I think my greater point here is not to demonize either side, but to kind of show that he told me this, what they really are hoping for is a lot more cooperation. Because in an Arctic climate like that, even having all that oil but not having a real diversified economy, you got to have some friends. Everybody has to have some friends.
Oh yeah, peace and commerce. And you're absolutely correct about that. Unfortunately, Putin and Russia are the only ones who are going around trying to say, let's just be friends and call off all of this fighting. Here we have the United States, which has adopted the neocon policy of saying there should be no sovereign borders, and the U.S. Should run everything for the benefit of U.S. corporations. And that's the impasse right here. And Russia and a lot of other countries like China are realizing that, unfortunately, even with the election of Donald Trump, the basic policies of the U.S. government are not going to change, and it is headed to an inevitable conflict. And how bad it's going to be is really up to whichever world leader is the least mentally stable.
Also, Russians are they're kind of, I would call it kind of more manly men. They're more rugged and individualistic, and they they're selling all their gas and oil into Europe, but they kind of the way they think about things and their kind of family structure is quite a bit different than Western Europe. A lot of people, even it's quite a bit different than we are, and so they're not very liberal in some senses.
Yes.
And so I see them as actually more of a natural ally of us in some regards. There's some things where that there's trickery and there's all. I mean, they're going to do what they can do to get by, but on the other hand, they are looking for people to work with, and I think Israel is mainly kind of freaking out because America's waking up and realizing we don't want to be hitched to Western Europe if this is what they're going to be doing.
Yes.
And then we see over here to our west or east, Russia, which is like, hey, you know, we don't have a lot. We're proud. We don't have a lot, but we'll be willing to work with you if you just kind of cut this other crap out. And most of America wants to cut the other crap out.
Well,
so,
most of ordinary citizens want to cut the crap out, but, you know, look at it from the point of view of the money junkies. Because of that sweet little Bretton Woods deal, bringing in a guaranteed income, our financial sector basically got lazy in the area of manufacturing. And they said, we don't need to get our hands dirty. We'll just let the poor countries manufacture the products. And so manufacturing and manufacturing jobs have been going to other countries. Our factories are being shut down, stripped of their equipment, demolished in some cases, and domestic manufacturing capacity in the United States has been in decline since the 1980s. So we don't really have anything to sell to other countries that they really want to buy. America's products are now considered overpriced pieces of junk. I remember when I was a kid and you saw something in the store stamped Made in Japan, that meant, oh, poor quality junk. Today it's the reverse. Made in Japan or China, you know, potentially high quality, like the iPhone. Made in America, going to fall apart in the, in just a few months. And it's been this huge reversal. And when you add on top of it this disastrous experiment with GMO, the rest of the world does not want to buy our agricultural exports. And so the U.S. government is in a bit of a bind. Unless they can get the wars going and conquer these other countries and force them to buy our products, the U.S. economy is going to collapse.
Mike, you know that Burt's Bees product, that like chapstick?
Yes, I've seen it in the store.
Yeah, so I had someone from Thailand contact me. I was over there this winter and say, you know, how much does this cost in America? I really like this stuff. And I said, well, I don't know. It's just a couple bucks. It's more expensive than chapstick, but it's not real expensive. $8 in Thailand. So I think Trump has to really, you know, if you read like Carol Quigley, he talks about how when the British came into most of Asia, they forced them to push the tariff rate very, very low. And then a lot of the European goods overwhelmed the Asian market. They ended up being dependent on all these goods from England and France and other places.
It's the same thing they did to the American colonies.
Right. And so they jacked their rates up, and then all the manufacturing came in for different reasons, but now they're making everything, and they don't even want. At the border, they're going to say, okay, 150% tax on that. So Trump should really talk about that and say, you know, there are products. Someone wants Burt's Bees chapstick. Why does it cost $8? It's not the shipping cost.
No.
And if they don't want it, then we can't. It's got to be a two-way street is all I'm saying.
Well, we would like to see balance in the world economy. We would like to see balance of trade. We haven't had that in a very, very long time. But again, apparently the conventional wisdom in Washington, D.C. is that we're back in the same situation we were in 1907 and 1929. The economy is a mess. It's on the verge of collapse. There are no other solutions. It's time to get involved in a world war to try and correct the problem, or at least have something to blame for the economic hardships. Because if the economy collapses and they don't have a major war with a military peer like Russia and China to blame it on, the American people are going to blame the economic crash on Wall Street's greed and corruption and complicity by the U.S. federal government. And they'll point the finger or blame where it richly deserves to go. And so it's going to be time to go long on tar and feathers.
Yep. I think this time no one's fighting, and I think Russia, their mindset is pretty level-headed, and it's a little bit stoic in a way, very, Arctic kind of just quiet people. until there is a war, and then it's just all out. And we don't want that. We're not biting, and they're not biting, and sort of the media is just in a frenzy because they can't put any bait on that line to get those fish active.
Well,
So
we've been lied to so many times. You know, we were lied to about Saddam's nuclear weapons, lied to about Assad gassing his people. We're not going to believe anything the government or the corporate media tells us about Russia or Putin. You know, we're not going to be made fools of again. We don't dare take that chance.
Well, it's shows like this that are helping us to wake up. So thanks, Mike.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, and stay warm up there. We're going to let you go and get on back here to the news. Now, I got an email here saying that Twitter does follow a practice called shadow blocking. Apparently, you can Google it. And basically, it means if Twitter puts a shadow block on your account, you can tweet all you want, but it will not show up even for the people following you. And so, yeah, the censorship is out there in the government-controlled social media, which is why most of us are now starting to switch over to the new small upstarts, which seem to still have a little bit of respect for the First Amendment. Meanwhile, a group of Twitter users that were blocked by President Trump from commenting on his Twitter feed are now suing him and two top White House aides under the argument that Trump's Twitter account amounts to a public forum that he, as a government official, cannot bar people from. Well, that's a specious argument. It's also a clear expression of a double standard where the people attacking Trump are going to be forced back into Trump's Twitter feed, and the people who are supporting Trump are being shadow banned. But the reality is, as a matter of fact, a public official can bar individuals from a public forum if they are causing a ruckus, if they're being insulting and disruptive. We've seen that in all of the campaign activities last year. There were disruptors. They were asked to leave or made to leave. So I don't think they're going to get very far. Now, article out of Investment Watch blog is basically, they're citing a report from the Daily Caller News Foundation that came on out and said that most of these national pollsters were, in fact, churning out biased and misleading poll numbers during last year's campaign. Ooh, imagine my shock at that. And they're still out there on the attack against Donald Trump because they don't want to go back and admit that they were as much a part of the attempt to cheat the White House for Hillary Clinton as anybody else. It's becoming a very obvious feature of the liberal Democrats. They will not accept responsibility for their own actions. It's always going to be somebody else's fault. Now, one of our callers earlier mentioned the Overton window. And the Overton window basically comes from this psychologist or sociologist who came on out and said that there is considered within polite society an acceptable range of ideas. And ideas within that range, it's okay to discuss them and talk about them. That's the Overton window. Anything outside that window, polite society doesn't talk about that. That's extreme, that's kooky, that's conspiracy. And so it's led to this article over here saying that, in effect, because of the Overton window, this is from Zero Hedge, we're living under intellectual martial law, where we are being conditioned to just say that these ideas are acceptable to debate, these other ideas are completely, totally off limits, like the Clinton dead body count, was Hillary spying and selling our secrets and so forth. And, of course, that's where the independent media comes on in. Because a primary function of the extremist is to stretch that Overton window in order to make previously taboo subjects suitable for discussion. A good example would be the murder of Seth Rich when it first happened. It was a botched robbery. Anything else is outside the Overton window. Now we've got people even in the corporate media saying that there's something funny there. So we're widening that Overton window, and maybe we'll get some nice drapes for it, track lighting, something like that. All right, let's get on over here into the war zones. Government forces are rapidly advancing in southeastern desert against ISIS, and at this point, ISIS has lost pretty much 60% of all the area they once controlled in both Syria and in Iraq. And so it's going very, very badly for this proxy group. And one advantage of the U.S. having this proxy group is that even though technically the U.S. agenda is being defeated, the U.S. can say, well, we were on the side against the terrorists, and therefore we emerge victorious, which I think we're going to see more and more of that in the coming weeks. Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is out there saying that countries that will be invited to carry out the control functions in the de-escalation areas in Syria will have to coordinate with the Syrian government, which makes a lot of sense. But what Lavrov is really doing is he's launching a little barb at the U.S. government, which is not coordinating with the Syrian government because it doesn't have the permission of Syria's government to be in Syria in the first place. Despite this, Russia says they will continue to cooperate with the U.S. on the de-escalation zones in Syria. So it looks like once again, Vladimir Putin, the statesman, has calmed the situation down in Syria. The first time he did it was over the chemical weapons, and he negotiated the deal for Syria's chemical weapons surrender. And at that point, the U.S. government changed their story. Oh, he's ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We're not after Assad. And, well, yes, we're after Assad because he's gassing his own people. And it's almost like today's excuse for the U.S. to attack Syria, that they're choosing it with a dartboard. But Putin has managed to push it back again, which means there will be a new false flag, possibly a major one. And it's kind of amazing to hear people like John McCain screaming how unhappy he is that Putin is getting away with, taking control of Syria. Because, by golly, that's our job. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. ISIS is now confirming that al-Baghdadi is dead. He was reported killed in a strike a week ago. And because he's been claimed to have been killed so many times before, people were kind of saying, well, okay. But ISIS is now saying, yeah, you got him. And this time we really, 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 really mean it. Hey, we wouldn't lie to you. We're ISIS. Now, over in Qatar, Tillerson is flying into the Gulf. He's now looking for a resolution to the Qatar crisis, especially in the wake of this very damaging tie between Jared Kushner and Qatar's richest man. Apparently, Kushner was desperate for a $500 million loan from this very wealthy gentleman to try and salvage this particular project of the Trump empire. And apparently, looking at Kushner's history with his own hedge fund, the gentleman decided he wasn't going to step in and help out. And it was immediately after that that the White House started getting this hardline approach to Qatar. Now, whether Trump was in on this or not, or whether Kushner just said, we got to do something about Qatar. There's a big stink there, and I think Kushner is a real problem. And I think Trump would be well advised to basically get him out of the White House. And yes, it's going to cause a stink with his daughter and the family, but the White House is the hottest kitchen in the world. Now, the U.S., apparently frustrated that Saudi Arabia, acting as their proxy, has not been able to slap the Libyan people down hard enough where they will go back to being happy with a foreign puppet ruler, is going to dramatically escalate their involvement in Libya. They're talking about a permanent U.S. military presence. In other words, they're going to garrison the country, like the ancient Roman Empire. So... goes in. All right, now here's a very alarming story. This gets on back to what I said about how Putin seems to have calmed things down in Syria, and the war hawks like John McCain are not happy with it at all. They're out there frothing at the mouth. Russia's bad. We stand for democracy and goodness, and Russia's just evil. And so there's this story out of Zero Hedge, and they're talking about apparently out at the Dugway Proving Ground, there have been some very sloppy accounting practices or inventory practices, and apparently a batch of real, genuine sarin gas has gone missing. So I wonder where it is, where it's on its way to. But at this point, the war hawks, they're desperate to prevail in Syria because if the U.S. gets run out of Syria, it will be correctly perceived as the biggest U.S. military defeat since Vietnam, and it will significantly derail this agenda to dollarifize the entire Middle Eastern oil nations that was revealed to us all by General Wesley Clark. Just a plan of all these nations the U.S. was going to regime change and conquer, ending with Iran in 2008. All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over in Mosul, as you know, yesterday the Prime Minister basically said Mosul has been liberated, and it pretty much is. The fighting is all but over. There's apparently one area that's like 50 yards by 200 yards where there are some holdouts who are still fighting, but obviously they're completely encircled. They're running out of supplies, and it's only a matter of time. A lot of the ISIS members are surrendering, and once again we're finding out that a lot of them are foreigners. And some of the nationalities included French, Syrian, Palestinian, Saudi, Russian, and others. They're hired mercenaries. ISIS was a manufactured enemy. Now, Turkish President Erdogan has welcomed the victory of Iraq's troops over ISIS in Mosul, but he says you have to realize the city has been all but destroyed. The city is in ruins. And he's asking a very cogent question. Who is going to pay to rebuild Mosul for the people who live there? Because they've got nothing to work with. Somebody needs to come on in and start rebuilding the place. Now, there's an article over here in Pravda Report, and it's asking a question we keep asking all the time. Will Tony Blair finally stand trial for his part in the supreme international crime? And we are talking, of course, about the unprovoked attack on Iraq and the killing of Saddam Hussein, based on this pretext that there was a threat from weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be a complete and total lie. Now, back in 2004, the then UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, was interviewed by the BBC and asked if the invasion of Iraq was illegal. He said, yes. It's not in conformity with the UN Charter. From our point of view and from the Charter point of view, it was illegal. It was an invasion for profit, for control of the oil revenues, for control of territory based on a completely made-up fiction. Just like when Hitler had his own people destroy the radio station in Gleiwitz, Germany, blamed it on the Poles and invaded Poland. Or like when the USS Maine exploded from a coal bunker fire in Havana Harbor. And President McKinley and William Randolph Hearst said, oh, it was a Spanish mine, and attacked Spain. That's how these wars get started. And we've seen many examples even within our own lifetime, which is why we need to be very careful about the next big lie coming out of the government and the corporate media to try to get us into war with Russia or China or whoever, because we know it's going to be a lie. The government has to lie to you to get you to go along with the war, because what would happen if they stood up and said, we're going to attack this country, they haven't done anything to us, but boy, they got a lot of mineral resources we need, and they're refusing to go along with the globalist agenda, they refuse private central banking, we really don't like them, and we think that all their wealth should belong to us. Would you let your kid go off to a war described like that? No, of course not. That's why throughout history, whichever world leader seeks to initiate a war has to trick their own population into it. There has never been an exception. Now, the USS Nimitz carrier strike group has arrived in India to take part in war games with the Japanese and Indian navies known as Malabar 2017. And already the White House is saying this is sending a strategic message to Beijing. We're going to start rattling our sabers. If China is not going to help us with North Korea, then the battle for the Sea of China South China Sea is well and truly on. And in a further rattling of sabers, the U.S. is sending missile warships, Navy SEALs to massive war games off of the coast of Ukraine in the Black Sea. Now, these are, again, multinational war games. It's called Sea Breeze. And it's going to have maritime forces from 16 countries. It's sort of the Mediterranean version of the RIM pact that we have here in Hawaii every 2 years, which is impressive to see here. They're still out there screaming about North Korea and its missiles, saying North Korea will be capable of striking San Diego within 2 years. Be afraid, be afraid. I'm not afraid. Why would North Korea do it? Knowing the response would turn North Korea into a giant green glass parking lot. Lots of countries have missiles capable of striking the United States of America. Doesn't mean they're going to do it. Having a nuclear weapon doesn't mean the country is actually going to use it. It's a deterrent. There's only ever been one country that used nuclear weapons on another country, and that's the United States. Nobody else has done it. But everybody wants weapons in order to scare other nations away from trying to invade them. That's the real value of having nuclear weapons. And if Kim Jong-un gets that capability, he's not just going to throw it away on a whim. Weapons of deterrence are always the last devices to be employed in a war. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. China has come on out and said that it refuses to allow the United States to make it somehow responsible for the crisis in North Korea. And it was inappropriate for the United States to try and put China on the spot like that, especially given the tensions that are coming out of the South China Sea. But China has now come on out and said that they are not the key to calming tensions on the Korean Peninsula. If you really want to calm tensions on the Korean Peninsula, let South Korea's new president, Moon Jae-in, do what he wants to do. Reach across the DMZ, grab Kim Jong-un's hand and say, let's calm this down and talk about reunification. Now, do you remember back during the Obama administration, there was this big stink where under accusations of espionage, the U.S. expelled a whole bunch of Russian diplomats and confiscated 2 Russian diplomatic properties. No evidence, just said, we're absolutely pretty darn certain that you guys are spies. And it was another way to try and provoke Russia. Russia did not rise to it. But at this point, as the issue of those properties has come up again, sources in the Russian Foreign Ministry are saying that Moscow may expel some 30 American diplomats. It was kind of a tit for tat for the little provocation back then. I think they would be ill-advised to do so. I think Trump would be well-advised to allow those previously expelled Russian diplomats back in and return those properties. Technically, under international law, those properties represented sovereign territory of Russia. We need to back off all of this stuff. Unfortunately, it's clear Trump is being manipulated. The intelligence is being skewed by those around him to twist him to their own purposes. And unfortunately, it looks like Donald Trump has somehow been convinced that war on a major scale is now inevitable and necessary, and that without it, our country will collapse. And unfortunately, on that last one, I actually agree. So apparently the White House has hired 2 new experts to aid in war planning. Blackwater founder Eric Prince and billionaire Stephen Feinberg have been recruited for war planning. These are people whose personal fortunes are very much tied up in the continuance of the military agenda. I don't think they're going to be objective and unbiased as to what's the best way to handle it. It's going to be invade, 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 spend, 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 spend. Now, over at realagenda.com, we did a flashback article here to this organization called the Center for the New American Security, which is actually the same people that started the Project for the New American Century, There's been some personnel changes, but it's the same agenda. Their agenda is, it's neocon, hardcore neocon, America should rule the world. Well, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, but unfortunately, the Center for the New American Security is out there trying to influence policymakers to go ahead and just start World War III. Their agenda is unchallenged power alone is all that matters, and it doesn't matter what the human and material cost will be, because on the far side, we will rule the world, and it will be a golden age. I'm wondering how many of those people are on prescription antidepressants or have lead in their drinking water, because they don't seem sane from a distance. Delusions of greatness, megalomania, an absolute callous disregard for humanity in general. Interesting little video that was on the website earlier. Apparently there was a problem, once again, with the F-35. They were trying to do a landing on a U.S. Aircraft carrier in the dark, simulating wartime conditions. All the lights were off on the carrier, and they were coming in the hover mode. Wasn't a trap shot. But unfortunately, it was coming in over the deck of the carrier. The display system of the F-35 that was supposed to guide him to the landing spot started to malfunction. And fortunately, the pilot was able to sort of guess where he was and get onto the deck safely. But even the officers were saying, we got really lucky. Well, I don't think we should be spending that much money on an aircraft that relies on the pilot's luck to get on through. Less lucky, unfortunately, are 16 U.S. servicemen who apparently were killed when their KC-130 crashed Monday afternoon in a soybean field in LaFleur County, rural Mississippi. Looking at the wreckage, it's pretty compact, but apparently some debris was found 5 miles away, which suggests that either it was tumbling violently and something came loose, or they had some other kind of a failure. The debris that was found away from the main body has not yet been reported on. Could have been a rotor burst in an engine, but it was a crash, and unfortunately these people are dead. And it's a rough business. Very unreliable equipment they have out there. Down in Israel, Mordecai Benunu, who was the guy who back in 1986, he exposed Israel's nuclear weapons program, and he spent 18 years in jail for that. He's been arrested and sentenced again for violating the terms of his parole, which was he talked to foreigners. That's the condition of his parole. He's not allowed to leave Israel, and he's not allowed to talk to foreigners. And somehow he made a mistake, or he was lured into a trap, and they've thrown him back in jail again. And Israel is very vindictive about this because they're still trying to maintain the official policy of ambiguity. Maybe we have nuclear weapons and maybe we don't. Well, in the real world, looking at those photos that Mordecai Benunu smuggled on out, yeah, Israel has a bomb factory hidden underneath the Dimona reactor. So this is a very alarming trend, and one of our callers earlier in the show referred to it. The Federal Elections Commissioner is looking to investigate what are described as right-wing media outlets under the excuse that they may have helped Russia interfere with our presidential election. In other words, anybody who was being critical of Hillary Clinton and supportive of Donald Trump is now by default an arm of Russian propaganda. I remember when the Washington Post came on out and listed us all as, we obviously had to be working for the Russians. You know, anybody who doesn't love Hillary has to be a Russian asset. No, we're just expressing our honest opinions, which we are allowed to do under that First Amendment. But apparently they're looking at going after Drudge Report and Breitbart. Apparently, the trigger for that is if they accepted any advertising on behalf of a Russian company, they are now considered to have been bought by the Russian government in order to bias their news reporting. Again, it's a smear job. There's no proof. We here in the independent media, we're putting out our honest opinion about what's going on, backed up by as many facts as we can muster. We are certainly far less bought and paid for than the corporate media. Now, the head of the FEC is a Democrat, of course. And apparently they're after Alex Jones as well, who unfortunately has made several mistakes lately that have harmed his credibility. All right, let's talk about the economic news here. Story coming out of shtfplan.com talking about the death of the middle class and showing how the suburbs have absorbed half of America's poverty growth. Now, that sounds like kind of a very vague and fuzzy statement, but basically what it's saying is more and more people who were already in suburbia have been driven below that poverty line by rising prices, dwindling salaries, and so forth. And again, this is by design, because throughout history, every tyrant, every dictatorship destroys the middle class, because it is from the middle class, who have a little extra money to work with, that opposition to oligarchy will arise. France, under Louis XVI, stomped on the middle class. The middle class was stomped on by Great Britain in colonial times here in this country. Russia crushed out their middle class. And then when the Soviet Union took over, they designed a system that didn't even have a middle class to begin with, which is one of the reasons they lasted as long as they did. Middle class is the target. Not just as having surplus wealth that can be harvested that the poor don't have, but for political reasons, to remove the possibility of any change in the system. All right, let's take a phone call. Bill in Illinois, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Thank you. Oh, just a couple of items I wanted to remind you of, because I know you're old enough to remember that we got stopped in Vietnam. They said, well, they told the soldiers, well, you can go this far, you can't go that far, this, that, and the other. And then we got stopped where else? In Korean War, 52. And on and on. Guess who stopped us each time? China. And you don't think China stopped us?
Well, no, I think there was a confluence of factors. I mean, certainly China did not want us getting too close to them. But I'm also thinking about how in the first war in Iraq, how our forces were stopped before they ever got to Baghdad. Certainly in Vietnam, and probably to the same extent in Korea, the purpose of the war wasn't really to conquer territory, but to grind up older munitions and weapons so the American people could be taxed to buy new weapons and munitions, because that's part of the war scam. Every time there's a time of peace, the people start saying, we don't need to buy any more weapons. You got stacks and stacks of them over there. Oh, let's start a war and use up all the old stuff because we want to buy new stuff now.
Right. See, real fast, Mike, China is not going to let us even get near North Korea. They are and going to be till the end of time, and China does have enough armaments to stop it. And guess who give us the errant information to go into Iraq, and they finally publicly apologize for it? Why, none other than that little postage stamp of an ally of ours, Israel. And, how we could have went in on their say-so. See, you were right. 50% were in the Middle East, just like Wesley Clark said, to get the rich richer. But we're there on Israel's behalf. We're their bully boy, see? And so we want to install, just like Wesley Clark said, people that are favorable to Israel, and we're doing it. But it's not going to work because it's all going to blow up one of these days where nobody has control of it. And I suppose Russia and China and us and everything will get into it to a certain amount, but we'll never do it all the way because we'll get back to what's called MAD, mutually assured destruction. And I thank the kindly for the time.
All right, well, thank you very much, and we're going to let you go for a commercial break. We'll be right back with another phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones here. Mike in Kentucky, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you kind of talked about targeting media, and I don't have probably the extensive, detailed background in computer programming that you do, but I've certainly seen a lot of strange shenanigans over the years. I started cataloging a lot of it. You mentioned something about shadow banning. Of course, a lot of that stuff was seen as tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, but it's not so much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And
because the tinfoil hat people have been proven right time and time again. In fact, tinfoil hats are now in fashion.
Well, I'm Ajit Podge, the FCC guy, and they're trying to make a national example out of us. And, of course, I think I was hired to do some video production work by some right-wing anti-government, militia gun nut, groups or associated coalitions way back in the late 1990s, and probably further made a target out of myself and the community TV station that I was asked to come to work for. And we did things on the UN Man in a Biosphere and some little programs like that involving Gatewood Galbraith, who is an advocate for industrial hemp. Of course, they've been dragging their feet on that, where Kentucky is missing out on probably $15 to $18 billion industry for the last several years, as they've robbed us of our coal economy.
Yes.
And at the same time, just massive amounts have been exported out west, like 4 times the amount of coal being exported for the entire state of West Virginia is coming out of the Powder River Basin, going out of sight, out of mind to other markets, and the whole war on coal is a big flim-flam.
Well, it's all a big flim-flam, and it's all about, saying which way the money that's being sucked out of the people is going to be directed. That's what's really lying behind the current debate over leaving Obamacare where it is and coming up with a new version. It's going to be the same scam. All that's really changing is who gets the profit from it.
Well, we're finding documents that were, hung up in their computer system, their glitchy system that they claimed didn't exist, and there was an appeal file that disappeared for a few days, and we've had some fun stuff going on with the FCC, and people have looked at it that are kind of sympathetic, or saying, look, these folks are serving the public more so than a lot of full power stations. And of course, you may have followed that story out of Florida from, I think it was WTVT, Boynton, the general managers basically said, we paid $5 billion for these TV stations. We're going to tell you what the news is, where the reporters were repeatedly asked to re-edit a story on the bovine growth hormone that was being added to the cows. And they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled, look, just because they have a license from the government, there's no obligation for the media to tell you the truth.
Yeah, we talked about that.
That's where we're at. I mean, nobody has any obligation to tell you the truth, even if it's their...
They don't even see it as their job. Again, last February, right on the air on MSNBC, Mika Brzezinski said, the job of the corporate media is to control what the American people are thinking. And everyone needs...
Joseph Goebbels said it's the absolute right of the state to control the formation of public opinion.
Yes.
And that's a Nazi propagandist opinion there. So
when the war was over under Operation Paperclip, they brought all the surviving propagandists over to the U.S. to learn how Goebbels had done all of that. And yes, they're copying the same methods.
The movie The Right Stuff, where Lyndon Baines Johnson was worried, was our Nazis better than the Russians' Nazis?
Yes.
That was the scene. Part of the space program.
There were, I heard a lot of this when I was actually working inside NASA, and it really is all true. There was literally a war going on between von Braun and everybody else. He wanted to be unquestionably in control of the space program, but he blew it when he sent up the monkey in the Mercury test capsule and missed the opportunity to beat Yuri Gagarin in. And after that, von Braun was sort of lowered, and other voices took over the direction of the space program.
Yeah, who knows how many of the Russians lost, though, and killed in their space program that we don't know about, because they just went full steam ahead.
Yeah, well, there were a few. They had one bad pure oxygen fire, which they hushed up, or could have sounded a warning for our own Apollo 1. Anyway, listen, Mike, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And sure enough, now that the U.S. government's proxies in Iraq have clearly failed, and have lost. The U.S. is out there publicly proclaiming, we have won against ISIS. So it's a win-win situation, which Donald Trump would like. Getting on back to the economic news here, Italy has stepped in with more funding to save yet another failing bank, bringing the total cost to the Italian taxpayers to over $25 billion. And apparently Finance Minister Pier Carlo Padoan announced earlier today that the government had received approval from the European Commission to pump 5.4 billion euros into Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena in exchange for the lender undertaking a major restructuring overhaul. Well, two things here. First of all, the bank should have undertaken a structural overhaul long before now, or maybe they know that a structural overhaul isn't going to change anything. Because when you have an economy that is based on debt, sooner or later that debt is going to eat you. And the second thing to keep in mind is, once again, ordinary people are made to pay the costs of the crimes, corruptions, and stupidity of the money junkies. And the Italian people are not happy. And as a matter of fact, Bruno Marques, who was Portugal's EU minister between July 2013 and November 2015, is in an interview at the Express, was saying the Italians are more and more aware that the problem with the country's economy is linked to the EU membership. That Italy had a growing economy before the creation of the European Union, and since then it has stagnated and gone into total decline. All right, let's go on over and take another phone call here. Bob in the Upper Peninsula. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon.
I like these people with the cardboard signs that health care is a right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, First Amendment, free speech is a right, but nobody's buying me a radio station. By the Second Amendment,
I like that. That's a good idea.
Firearm, but nobody's buying me a gun. Just because you have a right doesn't mean that somebody else has to pay for it.
That is an absolutely brilliant analysis of the problem there. Okay, yes, you have a right to health care, but you're going to have to get out your own checkbook. The problem I have with all of this debate, and it's a further down on the list, but we might as well talk about it now. Neither side, the Obamacare side, the Trump care side, Republicans, Democrats, they're all dancing around this issue of how to plunder more money from the American people and hand it to their particular cronies, and nobody's really looking at the critical question. Why is medical care in the United States so outrageously expensive to begin with and so poor in quality? In the United States, medical care costs something like 10 times what the equivalent procedures do in other countries. And the other countries are doing those procedures even better. And somebody really needs to look at that.
It's a simple thought from the UP of Michigan. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's switch over to Paul in New Jersey. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Concerning North Korea, Michael, I've been hearing people on the so-called Patriot right basically war gaming and egging on the conflict with North Korea. They think it's very simple that we can just, fly by and bomb their nuclear facility or their rocket facilities, and that there will be no repercussion. And I think they fail to realize, at that point it's going to be up to Kim Jong-un on what kind of retaliation and where the war will go.
Yes.
The fact of the matter is there could be 5 million men dug in foxholes, spread out through that heavily forested, with steep mountains, very tough terrain to fight a war in. And exactly how does the leaders in the Patriot community, how are they going to ferret those men out? We would have to have a draft in America.
Well, all you need to do is look at how badly the U.S. did when the Korean War first started to know how tough it is to fight in that area. But there's a more important question that we need to go on back. These war hawk armchair warriors who don't really understand the dynamics of the situation, they're all out there saying, well, let's just bomb their nuclear reactor and their rocket launch sites and so forth. The problem is by now, I'm sure that Kim Jong-un has dispersed his nuclear weapons. And a lot of the rockets they've developed are on mobile launchers. And they're probably in tunnels by now. We don't know for a certainty that we can go in with a surgical strike to North Korea and get all of the existing nuclear weapons and long-range rockets. We just simply do not. And even Mattis is saying we would be idiots to get into a ground war in North Korea. They have the home court advantage. They also have built up a huge amount of just ordinary traditional artillery in all the years of the so-called ceasefire. So it would be extraordinarily costly. And as far as the so-called decapitation strike against Kim Jong-un himself, locating him is going to be very, very difficult. And more important, you could actually make the situation worse when you realize who's lined up behind him to be the next ruler of North Korea.
Exactly. Now if you have all these wargaming so-called patriots, armchair generals out there on using our airwaves to promote this conflict and promote a war, I advocate that that is a public volunteering to join the military, and we should extend the draft ages up to the age of 65 and beyond for talk show hosts. I really do believe this. And further, referring to Smedley Butler, he said what needs to be done in war is to nationalize earnings. So the highest paid citizen is paid the same wage as the soldier in the foxhole. Okay?
Yes.
And that will steer all these militarists and the military-industrial complex, if they know that their earnings are the same as the boys in the foxholes. I think that would slow and put a lot of dampering on the ardor of those who wish war.
It certainly would, and there's one other thing that we could do, and that's return to the good old days where those who wanted a war would lead their own troops into battle, instead of sitting thousands of miles away in an air-conditioned bunker, pushing a button and sending other people's children off to be killed and crippled.
Right. So did you get that? Joel Skousen, I'm going to name the names of the people I heard. Joel Skousen, Alex Jones, and Joe Farah. They were all wargaming and analyzing and basically giving Trump a green light to bomb North Korea. It was disgraceful.
I agree.
We need to call them out on it and say, you guys go sign up. Stop talking and get yourself a tin helmet and a rifle and go to the front if you're going to talk like that.
Well, that's one way to approach it. I mean, generally when I'm making a public appearance, in my little briefcase, I have a whole bunch of enlistment forms for the military services. And somebody comes up and says, I think we need to go attack. Okay, here you go. Fill it out. I'll drop it off at the recruiting office on the way home. And that usually will shut them up. And, of course, we have our little meme over here about here's your rifle and here's your parachute. But in the end, I think we need to focus on the fact that there's a certain question of doability, practicality with these ideas of bombing North Korea, given that Kim Jong-un has known that the U.S. has been gunning for him for quite some time, that the issue is his long-range missiles and nuclear weapons, and by now they are dispersed. Unless you totally destroy the entire country and wipe out the entire population, there's no way to know for certainty that you have actually destroyed all the nuclear weapons or all the long-range rockets. You just don't.
And that's what's very sick in the immature and cavalier attitude many of the proponents of the war show, the negative characteristics of just promoting this. It's just madness. And one last thing, we have to cross an ocean to get involved there.
Yes.
Can't we let the Asian people work out this issue on their continent and mind our business?
Well, see, the problem is there are too many people in this country who think North Korea is our business. There's $1 trillion worth of rare earth elements under the ground there that are lusted after by American corporations who've depleted our domestic supplies. Then you have the fact that North Korea is one of the world's largest opium poppy producers, rivaling Afghanistan, and at the moment that opium is now competing with the CIA's Afghan opium and driving prices down. And the CIA would like to take control of North Korea's opium in order to establish a monopoly and drive the prices back up. And so that's...
And North Korea isn't linked with the Rothschild banks. And they also
True.
supplied nuclear talent and technology to Iran.
Well, we're told that they did, but we don't know how much. I mean, after all, I think it was Russia actually built that nuclear power station in Iran, so I don't know how involved North Korea was with that. But I mean, there are a lot of private overlapping agendas that all end with the same result, war on North Korea. And it is an important lesson from history that we all need to remember that wars or assassinations never happen for just one cause. What it is you have a group of individuals or institutions who have their own particular agenda, but they overlap on the same solution, and that's when these things will happen. American corporations want the rare earth elements, invade North Korea. CIA wants control of the opium, invade North Korea, and on and on and on. And yes, it does look like we're still aiming for war with North Korea, but again, I question whether a surgical strike can actually work, whether a decapitation strike might not put the North Korean government into even crazier hands than are currently at the helm. And more importantly, if we get sucked into a ground war in North Korea, we will do no better than we did 50 years ago, and it will be a new Vietnam for the United States.
Exactly. And by the way, wars have a habit of spilling over into all kinds of nasty unintended consequences. So
look at how the war in Vietnam wound up being in Laos and Cambodia as well, although we didn't find out about it. I'm sure China is very concerned about North Korea being the back door for an eventual war between the United States and China.
Yeah, exactly. So either way, I don't see how it's going to benefit the United States. And my brother and I, we had conversations before Trump's election, and we were concerned about this very thing, that this would be a way to get the, if Trump wins, the neocons will be able to get the American rural people and the Trump supporters and support them into basically a neocon war. And with the help of the basic demographic of, people who sign up for the military, the rural whites, behind a war and against to serve international Zionist interests also.
Yeah, that's another one of the overlapping layers behind all of this stuff. Right now, though, apparently military recruiters in the United States are starting to shift their focus away from the rural communities because people are too spread out, and they're starting to go after the inner city youth, the millennials, the people who can't find a job, and in a way they've created an economic draft where people coming out of school, they've got three choices: move in with the parents, live in the streets, or join the military. And a lot of them join the military. And Claire and I have talked to recruits here on the island who said the only reason they signed up for the military is there simply was no place else they could go. And, of course, if we invade North Korea on the ground, they'll have to bring back the draft, and that will probably wake up America as to just how serious all of this is.
Exactly, and that's what could be the nasty repercussions out of a so-called surgical strike.
Well, my concern is that in order to get this thing going, because Kim Jong-un has not carried out any more nuclear tests, and the rocket he tested the other day was actually a mid-range rocket. It's not their longest-reaching rocket. They already have long-range rockets that could reach San Diego. And again, he hasn't actually used them. He's not that stupid. He may be arrogant, rude, foolish. He's not stupid. Like every other ruler on earth, he goes to bed at night dreaming of a future where students are memorizing his name and his face and his biography, that he's got statues to his honor and his face is on the postage stamps. And no ruler wants to blow up his own country because then that sort of thing won't happen. But again, my concern is there may be a false flag. The U.S. could actually set up a small nuclear weapon someplace and claim it was an attack by North Korea. And, of course, we're very nervous here because down here in this harbor was the site of a war-starting attack last time, which turned out to be something other than the official story. So they could do it again, or they could do it in Guam.
Well, I'm not worried about it.
Well, I am.
Well, no, I'm not. I can sleep knowing that other countries have nuclear weapons, like North Korea or Iran or Syria, for that matter. It doesn't bother me. I'm
in agreement with you. It doesn't bother me that North Korea has nuclear weapons. Okay, I'm worried about the United States in its eagerness to get wars using one of their nuclear weapons as a false flag. I mean, they're not going to crash airplanes into skyscrapers again. It's passé. Been there, done that, did not buy the T-shirt.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Dan in Texas. And, Dan, I may have to take you through the next commercial break. What's on your mind?
Yes, what's on my mind is this whole thought about going to war. It kind of doesn't make sense, when people are like, I'm surprised they haven't woken up, is why are we even thinking about going to war when we don't even know where most of our military technology and equipment is being sold to. Maybe that's why North Korea has so much, and all these other countries, because nobody even talks about, they always talk about China having trade with them, but Russia also has real good trade with them.
Yes.
They have a civilian ferry going back and forth. And it just boggles my mind. Everybody's like, let's go to war, let's go to war. It's like, wait. They probably have they probably know everything about our equipment and know how to defeat it. That's why a lot of these coups have been going under, like in Ukraine and Syria. And look at just those missiles a couple of months ago. I mean, it just boggles my mind that people know that our technology is being sold, and they still want to send our troops out, knowing that other nations could have the information to.
Well, you remember the Chinagate scandal from the Bill Clinton administration. That was the information that he was allowing to be sold to China, militarily sensitive information regarding missile navigation and staging technology, which is especially where North Korea is weak on their rockets. They always seem to take themselves apart during the staging. Again, I haven't seen an actual blueprint of the rockets, but I have a couple of guesses what may be going wrong over there. Anything else?
It just seems suicidal.
It does.
No,
it absolutely does. It absolutely does. Anyway, listen, Dan, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to our show here. Getting on back to the economic news. We've been talking about the incredible gap between the claimed unemployment numbers coming out of the government and the corporate media and the very dire reality that we are in. And even Fox News the other day admitted that the reality is that almost half of able-bodied Americans cannot find work. And that's even worse than the Depression of the 1930s. Over 100 million Americans willing and able to work cannot find a job, have not been able to find a job for weeks, if not months. And the number of young men not working has doubled over the last 15 years. So you cannot look at this and say that this is an economy in recovery or that it's a healthy, functioning economy. I think what is going on here is the money junkies and the various Congress critters have come to the realization this economy cannot be turned around. And the goal now is to just suck everything they can out of it before it collapses. Basically, they're grabbing the silverware and heading for the door. Because we haven't seen them really do anything that appears to serve any other purpose than to accelerate the flow of wealth from the pockets of the American people into the pockets of the corporate CEOs and their lackeys in Congress. Okay, apparently Amazon has announced they're going to start their own version of retail computer repair, a rival to the Geek Squad. And apparently on that announcement, Best Buy lost $1 billion in value off of its stock with that, because Best Buy does not have the best of reputations in terms of the way they treat their customers. Neither does Geek Squad. I've only had to, the last time I dealt with Geek Squad, I wanted my computer repaired, and all I got was a non-stop sales pitch to upgrade to a new Windows 10 machine. It's like the guy did not even want to look at my computer, which I wound up replacing with another home build. So I'm going to take a good look at whatever it is Amazon is coming up with. But you know something? I grew up in an age where competition was considered a vital part of the functioning economy. That you've had lots of little companies that were competing in the same marketplace. It would keep prices low for the consumer, and it would keep quality high. And that was why competition was being encouraged. Now, under fascism, competition is discouraged, it is destroyed, and monopolies are allowed to take over. Because monopolies can sell you whatever they feel like selling you for whatever price they feel like selling it to you for. Windows 10, for example, here. Now, India continues to be one of the top consumers of gold, and apparently they are now pulling back another 220 tons of physical gold to serve their consumer market. That's a lot of gold. All right, we've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over at Market Watch, they had an interesting article. The headline goes, "Stay away from Bitcoin and Ethereum. They are complete garbage." And basically, they're going on in there and saying that these cryptocurrencies or cyber currencies, which are all the rage, they're not really a store of value. When you look at the recent sell-off that shaved 30% of their value in a week, anything that is a store of value, you don't see that kind of dynamic chaos on. It's a token only. There's no inherent value in a cyber currency, whether it's Bitcoin or the Federal Reserve notes that are living solely inside the bank's computers. A store of value is something that is tangible, that has a worth that is recognized around the world. A gallon of gas, a diamond, silver, gold, and so forth. And that's been one of my concerns about Bitcoin all along, is it can be manipulated. So all of a sudden, I'm scratching my head over this story out of Investment Watch blog, where Goldman Sachs is now predicting Bitcoin will go to $4,000. And knowing Goldman Sachs' history of less than ethical behavior, such as that deal with Papandreou in Greece that put that whole country into a mess, are they going to get ready to do a classic pump and dump? Going to get everybody, oh, it's going up, everybody buy on in. And then they sell out at the top and everybody else gets absolutely nothing. Because a pump and dump scam is very common. Almost as soon as they had a stock market, the speculators were playing pump and dump. Start buying like crazy, start a fever, a trend, get everybody else buying on in, wait for it to peak, then sell out their holdings, and everybody else is left with pieces of paper and not much else. And you need to be careful about that. Wall Street stock trading likes to maintain the illusion that it's got rules and it's on the up and up and it's a very honorable and noble profession, but no, much of it is not. It's very predatory, it's very ruthless. I think about 4 years ago, there was a magazine that actually did an interview, and this was in the wake of the exposure of all kinds of fraudulent behavior, such as Enron, and then what was going on around 2008. And so this magazine interviewed a whole bunch of people working on Wall Street who were very forthcoming. 25% of them said, yeah, of course we cheat. It's the only way we can stay in business. There was that wonderful movie, Inside Job. It came on out, won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Documentary, and then promptly vanished. But I think you can still hunt it on down. And it talks about what happened first in Iceland, and then what was going on in New York on Wall Street. And it gives you a really good look at the actual mindset of these traders. And another one, of course, is the Leonardo DiCaprio film, Wolf of Wall Street. And as outrageous as that film looks, apparently much of it was pretty much the truth, because it was written from the book by the guy who actually was the Wolf of Wall Street. And remember, when some big trader scores a big score and makes a huge amount of money, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. Somewhere, somebody else paid for it. On these pump and dump scams on publicly traded companies, sometimes the company, which is not part of the pump and dump, can be driven out of business by it. Then there's green mail. That goes on a lot. Now, over in Germany, the IMF has come on in and said, well, the German people need to retire later. They need to save less, and they should be spending more to keep the economy going. Now, when I was a kid, saving was considered a good thing. But here in the U.S., we've even been hearing the same thing. Oh, if you're saving money, you're being selfish. You're being greedy to save your money. You should be spending it out into the economy, where the money junkies can grab it that much more easily. So we're starting to see this all over the globe. You're going to work till you die. Don't bother saving any of your money. Just spend everything that you make to keep the system going a little bit longer. Article that came out of Blacklisted News, working past 70, Americans can't seem to retire. More and more Americans are spending their golden years on the job, and the trend looks likely to continue, and that, too, is another reason why ordinary Americans are looking around at the country and they do not see the possibility of a better future. The American people are dispirited right now. And that's another reason why trying to go to war with a skeptical, dispirited general population behind you is a fool's errand. So let's talk about Obamacare. It's basically in its own death spiral. At least 2 million Americans have ditched the coverage in 2017 because the premiums are going right through the roof. And a good example is the Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Montana is proposing a 23% rate increase next year. And a lot of people are just finding it cheaper to take those IRS penalties. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, the Senate Republicans have decided they're going to delay the start of their August recess to try and ram through this health care bill. And apparently there are now some 10 Republicans who are not going to vote for the current package, and they're arguing over things like subsidies and back and forth and who's going to get what money. Democrats are now trying to recruit Republican governors who are able to expand Medicaid in their own states under Obamacare to try and get them to weigh in on the discussion, because the National Governors Association, they're going to be holding their summer meeting in Providence, Rhode Island later this week, and they could be issuing all kinds of statements on this. But in the end, as I mentioned to that caller earlier, nobody is really talking about the real question, just why and how the cost of medical care in the United States became as sky high as it is, because it is nowhere near this expensive in other countries. We have the most expensive medical care on earth by a huge margin, and it's something like 32nd in quality. And we should be looking at that. Where is all the money going? Is it really going to pay for the medical care, or is it being simply sucked up by these layers and layers of gratuitous administrators who all think the sole purpose of you getting sick is to make them a little bit richer? And a good example of that be out in California, because apparently California was on the verge of actually passing a single-payer system. And analysts had shown it would give everybody in California basic health care, save the state billions of dollars. But the health care industry basically started making huge donations into the coffers of the Democratic Party's candidates for the California office. And all of a sudden the Democrats are saying, nah, we don't need single payer. Obamacare is just fine. Politicians, the finest worms money can buy. All right, let's take a phone call here. Herman in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing okay.
All right. I wanted to expose fake news concerning Cain's wife, the biblical Cain.
Okay.
But in order to do that, I have to finish climate change. Yes, there have often been climate change during the 4 billion, that's with a B, year history of Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But in that time frame, there have been 6 advents of mankind on Earth.
That's not what the fossil record shows.
That may be. But biblically speaking,
Well,
in Genesis
okay,
21.
Herman, I hate to cut you off, but this is not a show about religion, okay? And
I'm trying to answer your question about Cain's wife.
it doesn't have an
So
answer. Okay.
Yes, it does.
All right, Herman,
If
we're short on time, and I want to get back to the real world and the real news. So thank you very much for the phone call. All righty, getting on back to the situation. Now, as you know, over at the G20, there was quite a bit of a ruckus with all the protesters, and nobody knows where they came from, where they're being funded. A lot of identically printed signs were out there, so there was some support. German politicians are now demanding a crackdown on left-wing extremists following the G20 riots, saying that Germany's image in the international community has been damaged due to all the violence and rioting in Hamburg. I mean, they burned a Porsche dealership and all kinds of other things like that. Amazingly enough, CNN was reporting that the protests at the G20 were actually peaceful, that everything was all hunky-dory over there. Meanwhile, participants in the G20 protests are complaining that the police crackdown was too extreme. So it just goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Interesting little story coming out of government slaves. Apparently, there's a growing movement, petition drive, if you will, to ask airports and post offices across the U.S. to stop carrying CNN on those TVs, because it's time to blackball the fake news. Now, we're very lucky. At our local bank, they used to have CNN up there. I guess they got sick of all the lies because now they're running the Travel Channel, which is much more entertaining. So that would be a good thing. Meanwhile, according to CNN's Michael Smirkonish, CNN is still respected worldwide. I wonder if he says that to his reflection in the mirror 10 times before he goes to bed every night. We're still respected. We're still respected. We're still trusted. They still believe us. Anyway, apparently there's another big stink going on up in Germany because of statements made by African Muslim migrants when they get caught doing bad things. They're all coming back and saying, your laws don't apply to me because I am Muslim. And that is not going to help the situation any. And again, I go back to Teddy Roosevelt, and he had this really clear idea. You know, if you are an immigrant to the United States, come on in, you are welcome. Just understand, you are now living in the United States of America, and you are subject to our laws. We have one language. It's called English. And if you're going to come and live in our country, you have to make certain adjustments to the fact that you are now living in this country and not the former one. And one of the biggest reasons this whole New World Order, blend all of the Europeans in with the Africans and Middle Easterns, has blown up in their face is because of this attitude coming in from the migrants that you have to change your country to look like mine. Well, if you like your country all that much, why did you come here? If you don't like it, the way things are here right now, the proper solution is you go back home. And apparently, as the Syrian war winds down, a lot of Syrians are, in fact, leaving Europe and heading on back to Syria. That's a good thing. But that attitude problem about we're going to come on in and we're going to make your country look like our country, that's not migration. That's invasion and conquest. Now, here's a very bizarre story. This came out of the Express in Great Britain. Terror advice police video urges tourists to run, hide, and tell if they hear gunshots. Like we need the police to tell us that? It's absurd. Instead of making videos, the police ought to go on out and actually get the terrorists. Now, up in Massachusetts, Stephen Hay, a Democrat state representative for Fitchburg, has introduced a bill that will criminalize having a hidden compartment in your car. And he says it's all about fighting the war on drugs and the war on terror, but it doesn't matter what you're using the secret compartment for. You could be keeping your spare cash in there because you're going into a shopping mall and you don't want to carry all your cash with you. It's a good reason to have a secret compartment, but he wants to criminalize it. Everything in the car is visible to the police and to the car thieves. I don't think he's thought this one all the way through, and hopefully it'll get voted down. Okay, so I mentioned earlier in the show, it's just a few days over the anniversary of the murder of Seth Rich. And back then, everybody who questioned the official story was being denounced as kooks and tinfoil hat wearing crazies, conspiracy wackos. But since then, the Overton window has widened. And more people are saying, yeah, there does seem to be something there. It wasn't a botched robbery. The profiling group came on in and said it looked like it was a professional hit. And again, the leaked emails from the DNC and from Podesta stopped the day that Seth Rich was murdered. Now, as I mentioned before, there's an IT specialist, and he's staying anonymous because he doesn't want to follow Seth Rich. He calls himself the forensicator, and he came out with a detailed report of the metadata on the leaked DNC emails and demonstrates they could not have been downloaded over an internet because they were copied way too fast, meaning that the flash drive holding those files was actually connected to the server where the files were simply copied off. So again, another nail in the Russia hacked the DNC servers. And again, the FBI has requested access to those servers something like 13, 14 times, and been refused every single time. It reeks of cover-up. It reeks of assassination. And I think probably most Americans, like myself, are just getting fed up and disgusted with this idea that the rich and powerful can get away with this sort of behavior and nothing ever happens to them. But by golly, if you're hungry and starving and you steal a loaf of bread from the local convenience store, you're going away to jail for a long time. We do not live in a just system. Not when the rich and powerful can get away with what they get away with. We have a two-tier system. Us serfs, us slaves, and the nobility, the celebrities, the political elite, the ultra-rich. And I got to see a little bit of this myself when I was working in Hollywood. And it disgusted me then, it disgusts me now. If you are using the GNU PG crypto library, it has been cracked. Apparently they found a bug, or maybe it was an NSA backdoor in libcrypt 20. It has now been patched, and is being distributed for Debian and Ubuntu. So you may want to update that if you're using GNU PG on your system. Apparently, Hard Rock hotels have been caught up by the breach of Saber's Sin6 hotel booking service that emerged earlier this year. And apparently they got names, virtual numbers. They're saying personal information like Social Security, passport, or driver's license numbers was not accessed, but apparently enough data was where they're contacting customers and saying it's time to change passwords. And by the way, it is a good idea to be changing your passwords on a regular basis, and do not use one of those online password savers. That's just ridiculous. Here's an interesting study. Apparently there was a domestic dispute just outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this guy and girl got into an argument, and he asked her, did you call the sheriffs? And Google Home picked up on that and immediately called the sheriffs, and the sheriffs could hear in the background the domestic dispute. And they showed up, much to the surprise of both the people in there. So, got to be careful what you say around those things. They're listening all the time. Yeah, we already talked about that one. Now, the corporate media, of course, is still running with the claims of Russia hacking nuclear plants, even though they admit to zero evidence. You probably saw this a couple of weeks ago. Russia can hack our nuclear power plants. They can blow them all up. They can turn them into bombs. There are so many things wrong with that story. We got a phone call waiting when we come back from the commercial break, and then I'll tell you why this story is utter nonsense. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here from Sovereign Man in Freedom Land. Aloha, welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. I've got a lot of things on my mind, but right now I want to focus on this one thing. I received a message. It's an announcement for July 12th. It says there will be a massive internet-wide day of action to save net neutrality.
Okay.
The website is, if that's okay, it's battleforthenet.com.
Can you speak a little closer to the microphone on your phone, because we're having trouble hearing you?
Yeah. Is this any better?
Much better.
No? Okay. The website is battleforthenet.com and / July 12th. Yeah, just wondering if you heard anything about that.
I hadn't heard about this particular event, but obviously the debate over net neutrality continues to rage because the removal of net neutrality allows the corporations that have that net backbone to start charging for premium service rates, to marginalize those who won't cough up the extra money, to outright ban and block traffic that they do not like. Now, the whole principle of net neutrality actually goes back to when the government broke up the original Bell telephone into the regional telephone companies, and it ignited an argument over this idea that how were phone companies going to handle traffic that originated outside their area of business or terminated outside their area of business, or both. And it was established at that time the principle of a common carrier, meaning that even though administratively and economically the telephone system was now broken up into parts, it was to be operated as a single homogeneous system where all carriers would carry all traffic equally, and that was called the common carrier principle. So as the internet started to become commercialized, it sort of naturally gravitated to that same idea, that all internet service providers are carrying everybody's traffic equally. But the big players wanted to change that, and they wanted to come up with a system where they could basically have a fast lane for the internet that they would charge premium prices on, and those who couldn't afford the premium prices would be relegated to the slow lane. And even worse, there are no restrictions on just how slow that slow lane can become. And a lot of us are already dealing with the fact that we're paying for high-speed broadband speeds that we do not actually get in our home. And Spectrum is a big abuser like that. They've even been sued by the state of New York. And they're out there saying, we're not throttling, we're not throttling, we're not throttling. And yet in their own website, it says that load management requires slowing down traffic from time to time. They're just using a different word for it. And the idea is to maximize their profits. They're not upgrading their equipment or increasing their bandwidth. Like most of these other companies, they're already oversubscribed, which is why they're not able to deliver the service that is being paid for. And so now they just want to be able to say, well, we're going to have a fast service for like the streaming movie companies, and whatever's left over, everybody else can fight over. And it's not going to be good for individuals and small organizations. Basically, they're trying to turn the internet into just another media distribution network, only with a lot more buttons and keys on it. And that's why a lot of people are very upset over the loss of net neutrality.
And fees. And fees.
I couldn't hear that.
I said, and more fees.
Oh, of course. It's always about more fees. When a country gets in... okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't know if you've been noticing these, but here in my region, I've been noticing these transponders that are going up underneath the light post on the streets. I believe that there's a 5G network that's going up in the area.
Could very well be.
I don't know. Have you seen those? I mean, they're going to be
we're way behind the times here. We're way behind the times here in Hawaii. We're still catching up on the 4G.
Yeah. It's interesting. And you know, at the tip of Kauai, facing China, is a microwave station.
It's a radar. I've been up there. It's it's a military air defense radar. It's also used for tracking rockets coming out of the Pacific Missile Test Range. Anyway, Sovereign, I need to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're going to step on back to this story where a little while ago the corporate media was out there saying Russia could hack our nuclear power plants, and it's already happened once. Now, of course, that one time they say it happened. As it turned out, it was another nothing burger because they found this malware on a laptop that was not even connected to the systems running this nuclear power station. And they only said it had to be Russia because it had similarities to something that was in Russia. It was a very, very tenuous case. And again, there was no direct connection. So they had to back off that story. Now they're back out here saying Russia could hack our nuclear power plants. They could cause meltdowns. They could turn them into bombs. Well, you can't really turn a nuclear reactor into an atomic bomb because the uranium isn't enriched enough to support a nuclear detonation. That's the first mistake that they've made. Second of all, the computer systems that run critical infrastructure like power plants are not connected to the outside internet. The infecting agent has to be brought in on a flash drive. If you're worried about our nuclear power plants, you should be worried that Stuxnet is still out there in the wild, and that did not come from Russia. This is more of the same thing. Bash Russia, demonize Russia, no matter what it takes. And they're not getting any traction. Maxine Waters is still out there with the claim that 17 intelligence agencies agreed on the Russian hacking, even though the New York Times and the Associated Press were forced to admit it simply was not true, and they retracted the story. Now, the other part that you need to understand is it is impossible to 100% verify the origin of a cyber attack. Cyber criminals are very clever. That's why it's so hard to hunt them down. Moreover than that, the Vault 7 leaks revealed that the CIA had a specialized cyber warfare unit that specialized in false flag cyber attacks, of going on in, wrecking a computer system, and leaving indications that a third party had done it. So you don't know. When something gets hacked, you cannot say with certainty who did it. You just don't know. You simply do not know. Now, talking about selling bad products for the most money here, Intel is out there working around with a new chip, the Pentium G4560, and it is intended for low-end machines. But as it turns out, this chip is actually performing very fast. It features both hyper-threading and has 3 megabytes of L3 cache. And basically, it's $64 chip offering 3.5 gigahertz and 4 threads. It is so powerful at that price, Intel is concerned it's going to pull sales away from their more expensive higher-end chips. So they are going to go in and literally cripple it, make it less effective. They'll change the microcode around to make it time wasteful, energy wasteful, in order to make the Core i3 chip still competitive. Gone are the days where you made the best product you could in order to sell it to the public. Now you make something that's so-so, you fit it into your sales plan. It's amazing here. Apparently, Silicon Valley has been hit with a major wave of sexual harassment allegations. And apparently, is this really an abuse of positions by CEOs and all of a suddenly rich people who are just in love with their own power and wealth? We don't know, but scores of women are coming forward with allegations against high-tech investors, VCs, CEOs, and apparently some people have lost their jobs over this. So it is a huge scandal. By the way, speaking of Silicon Valley, CNN is taking a beating, not just in the ratings, even in the App Store. CNN-related apps are coming up as 1 star. BBC, Fox are both 4 to 5 stars. Now, the rating of 1 star has nothing to do with the quality of the app itself, but the content of CNN's news. Meanwhile, according to an article in Government Slaves, bad reviews of CNN and the CNN app are mysteriously disappearing. They're bringing censorship to the internet. And all that means is we'll find ways around it. It's really amazing here. Now, a lot of people are talking about the new digital rights management standard, and security researchers are worried. The new standard is called EME, or Encrypted Media Extensions, and it allows DRM systems to hook directly into your browser. That way, Netflix and other streaming video services can protect their shows and movies without making users install annoying, often insecure plugins like Flash or Silverlight. On that note, it's a win because there are a lot of ways where you can be watching a movie on a browser and make a local recording of it as well. But researchers and open web advocates are saying that by approving this standard, the World Wide Web Consortium is giving major browser developers and content providers too much power over what users and researchers can do. And there are concerns that this will break people, companies, and projects who are in the middle of something and they've got a workflow set up, and all of a sudden it stops working. And that can be a real major issue. I can't even begin to tell you the number of times where I have been working on something for like Claire's Choir, and I'll go on in, and all of a sudden the codec has changed, and I can't do the conversion, and this no longer works. And instead of actually working on the project, I have to go on out and find a new workaround, a new workflow, a new methodology, buy a new piece of software to get back to where I was before it all started. And it is one of the things that really has turned modern computers away from being productivity enhancers to productivity limiters. Back in Los Angeles, when I was still working in computer animation, one of the companies that was there, Digital Domain, they're still in business, by the way, they had an ironclad rule. All software versions and everything were locked down at the start of a production, and anybody who made any changes, any updates to their computer during the production, that was a firing offense, because of the possibility a new upgrade or change could break the workflow. And it had happened to other companies. It had happened to other companies I knew about. We even had that problem when I was out here working on Final Fantasy, where we were working with a very early version of Maya that just had problem after problem after problem. And we would be sent a new version that would fix the problem we reported, only to see that there was another problem that brought our production to a halt. We actually lost an entire production year. Our release date had to be slid back by an entire year because of all these software issues. Now, to be fair and just, Maya today is very robust. And if you are a computer animator, I recommend it highly. It's certainly a lot easier to install than 3D Studio Max, which I have a legal licensed copy of, and I've never been able to get it to install on Windows 7. And everybody points fingers at each other, and 3D Studio Max is out there saying, well, you need the new paid-for bi-monthly ultra new version. Why do you want to play with that old permanent license one? But Maya is actually very, very good for that. Now, as you know, part of the perks that come along with being the vice president is being the head of NASA, not directly, not the NASA administrator, but basically being delegated as in charge of the space program. So Vice President Pence is now making the visits to the various NASA centers, meeting with NASA leadership to find out what they want, what they think they need. There was a moment where Mike Pence was touching a piece of space gear that had a do not touch sign on it, and the Twitterverse erupted. Oh, Mike Pence, he's ruined the spacecraft. And NASA came out and said, no, it was okay. It's okay. The sign is there to keep the tourists from misbehaving and breaking off pieces for souvenirs, which actually did happen at some of the museums and things here. But Mike Pence is reiterating the promise to return to the moon and an eventual manned Mars mission. And I am fully on board with those objectives, not because we need to go back to the moon and that I want to see the flag of the United States of America fluttering over the plains of Mars, but because we all need to remember that tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s that was so good for our entire economy. Those are good times. It was all created in the technological fallout from the Apollo mission to the moon. And if we're going to bring the jobs back, the high-paying jobs back, if we're going to regain our supremacy in manufacturing, we can't compete with the rest of the world with the same technology we already let them have, foolishly. We must leapfrog ahead to new technologies, new materials, new products, and we need a civilian technology incubator with which to do that. And that's what the space program's true value to America is. It creates these new technologies, new industries, and new jobs. We saw it happen before. It can happen again. Now, yes, the military fund a lot of technology incubators, but they hang on to their stuff until it's so obsolete it cannot be commercially exploited. By the time it finally comes on out, the world has gone past them. So, yes, let us go back to the moon. Let us start to build our transit system into orbit again. Get that back. Let's go to Mars. Because along the way, we're going to find the path to reviving America's manufacturing. And that's the missing component. We don't have that right now. We will never regain our manufacturing superiority competing with other nations for what is being made today. Our corporate culture was very foolish in just letting that go to these other countries, and we're not going to get it back. Those other countries won't be that stupid. Michael Crichton actually wrote a book that talked about this called Airframe, and was never made into a movie, and I can understand why, because it talks about the aviation industry. But behind all of that was a cautionary tale about the dangers of globalism and how it was ultimately going to be bad for American companies. As they leveled the playing field, being that we were on the high ground, we would have to be pushed down, which is exactly what has happened since then. I admire Michael Crichton. He's one of those people who, when he reached a certain amount of wealth, he started using his art for socially constructive purposes. George Carlin was another. Once past a certain point, he was going to tell the truth as he saw it. Admire him hugely. Now, in 2 weeks, Russia is going to launch a new satellite. It is a very small satellite, roughly the size of a loaf of bread. It's a CubeSat. And they're going to launch it on a Soyuz 2 vehicle. But here's where it's going to be interesting. It's unfurling a giant pyramid-shaped solar reflector. And it's apparently a technology demonstration to test how to break satellites in orbit and deorbit them using the solar wind. And while it is up there, it will be the brightest object in orbit. It'll outshine the International Space Station. So that's going to be kind of exciting to look at. So good for the Russians on that one here. And yeah, that's a good use for a solar sail to bring down space junk. Space junk's becoming a big, big problem, and somebody has to solve it. Now, newer satellites by treaty do carry with them the means to deorbit and get out of the way of what's coming in the future. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff up there from before that agreement that it's dead, abandoned boosters, things that got lost. Ed White's outer glove is still up there someplace. And sooner or later, there's going to have to be a garbage collection service up there. And, of course, this gets into the issue of the idea of allowing our ground wars to be carried out in orbit, because we could turn near-Earth space into an orbital shrapnel field, which will make it impossible for any further space flight, commercialization of space, or exploration. We could literally entrap ourselves on our planet with all that debris racing overhead. One of the things that should alarm us all is that the planners for war never think about what's going to happen after the war is over. It's all victory or death. We will win, and then somebody else will clean up the mess. And boy, the messes are accumulating. Got them here in Hawaii. We got scrapped munitions, big piles on the ocean floor. It's marked on the maritime charts. No drag fishing here. You might bring up something you don't want. War in orbit would be more of the same. Looks good on paper. It certainly worked us to help defeat the enemy, but oh, gee whiz, there's a problem up there. I remember in the very early days of passive radio reflection from space, they actually floated an idea. This was about the time they were putting up the Echo series of passive reflector balloons, and they were very bright also. They actually proposed literally giving the Earth a Saturn-like ring of these wire needles. Fortunately, that idea was not allowed to go forward for the concerns I have just now shared with you. But again, the military, they get some strange ideas. Did you ever wonder why John F. Kennedy, when he talked about going to the moon, I would say to make it this mission before this decade of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth? And he always put that in there because the Pentagon had actually suggested the idea, in order to beat the Russians to the moon, of making it a one-way trip with a pilot who volunteered for a suicide mission. We're going to put him on the moon, and yeah, he's going to die there, but at least we beat the Russians. And the Pentagon actually thought this idea was going to fly. And that's why Kennedy always had that thing, return him safely to the Earth. We are not going to go with a halfway trip or a one-way trip. Been yet another study. This is being reported over in vactruth.com. Another study warning of the dangers of multiple vaccinations. That's where you take your kid on in and they get several shots all at the same time. And looking at the data that is being brought in from the vaccine incident tracking system, they're discovering that kids who get 3 or more vaccines at the same time have a much higher chance of winding up in the hospital with adverse reactions. And in some areas now, the triple vaccine, the MMR, they've stopped offering the single shots. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And sometimes political correctness can go way, way too far here. And I'm looking at this story, a gentleman by the name of Cloud Davidson. And when he was a kid, he would used to come to Hawaii every summer because his uncle, aunt, and cousins lived down on the Big Island near a place called Hapuna Beach. And so when Davidson grew up and he was living in Oregon, he opened a restaurant called the Hapuna Kahuna Tiki Bar and Kitchen. And was all part of his family, and his background was a part of his childhood, and he didn't think there was going to be anything wrong. But apparently he came under attack with accusations of cultural appropriation. Oh, he's appropriating the culture of the Hawaiians. How dare he do that? And it resulted in his bar going out of business from all the negative publicity. Well, there's no reason that you have to have this idea that only Mexicans can have a Mexican restaurant or only Italians can have pizza parlors. That's just plain silly. And I want to share a little insight with you. These Hawaii-themed places on the mainland help stimulate tourism to Hawaii. A lot of people come to visit in Hawaii. They got excited about Hawaii because they saw the Tiki Room at Walt Disney, or if they're a little bit older, there was a place called the Tiki's in Monterey Park, and it was really overblown. It was a big restaurant, and there was a big Polynesian floor show, and they had the fire dances and the hula girls, and it was tiki-tacky. It was actually so bad it became the stuff of legends, and I actually worked there briefly as a magician and a DJ when I was working my way through college. But people got excited by the experience and said, I want to see what the real Hawaii's like, and it was actually stimulating tourism. And now there's this warpath. You can't culturally appropriate other people's stuff. We're bringing them in as refugees and migrants. I really do think it is kind of nonsensical. Apparently, an 81-year-old imam has been jailed for sexually assaulting girls in a Welsh mosque. Wow, at 81, that's amazing. He's been thrown into jail for 13 years, which I think amounts to a life sentence. Was assaulting young girls during Quran lessons, and he was found guilty of 6 counts of indecent assault, and I'm reporting this for all of you who think I only pick on the Catholics on such things. No, I calls them as I see them. Apparently, there's been a bit of a whoopsie embarrassment. Apparently, back in March, police pulled this individual over for driving without headlights. Inspecting his car, they found powder on the floor and seats of the car. They had their canine unit smell it. The dog indicated positive for cocaine, and this guy spent 90 days in jail before somebody actually got around to testing the powder in a laboratory and found out it was drywall powder from his day job as a drywall installer. These use of dogs are flawed. The dogs are usually responding to sometimes unconscious cues by their handlers. They're not accurate. This is a good example of that. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back here tomorrow, Wednesday, Hump Day, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller's show. Take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. We have to keep pushing back against the corporate fake news while we still can. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.